Elara Voss had rebuilt herself from nothing. Not the kind of nothing people talk about at dinner parties, where nothing means a rough quarter or a bad breakup that stung for a few weeks. Real nothing. The kind where you sit on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, pressing your back against the cold tub, wondering how a person can feel so completely erased while still being alive. After 2 years inside a marriage that quietly took everything from her, she had clawed her way back. It was not graceful. It was not a montage. It was therapy appointments she could barely afford and grocery lists she wrote just to feel like she had control over something. It was learning how to sleep without flinching at sounds. It was relearning the sound of her own laugh and being surprised when it came out real.
She had built a small nonprofit from the ground up. Hope Forward, she called it. It was a resource center for women leaving dangerous relationships. Nothing fancy. A rented office with mismatched chairs, a secondhand coffee maker that gurgled like it was in pain, and a whiteboard on the wall where her team wrote the names of women they had helped that month. That whiteboard meant more to her than anything Damien Holt had ever given her. She had a quiet apartment too. 3rd floor, 1 bedroom. A window that faced east so the morning light came in warm and slow. She kept a small plant on the sill, a stubborn little thing she had almost killed twice. It always came back. She liked that about it. The life she had now was not glamorous, but it was hers. Every single piece of it. Damien Holt had made sure their divorce looked immaculate, because everything about Damien looked immaculate. That was his gift. He was the kind of man who could ruin you quietly, in rooms where no one was watching, and then turn around and shake hands with a senator while cameras flashed. To the city, he was a philanthropist, a charming, generous man who hosted fundraisers and gave speeches about lifting vulnerable people out of hardship. He wrote big checks to women's shelters. He smiled at children in hospitals for the press photos. Privately, he had made sure Elara could not afford an attorney who would ask the right questions. He had not needed to threaten her. He had simply made the process so exhausting, so expensive, and so carefully constructed that she had signed what he put in front of her just to make it stop. He never raised his voice. He never left a single mark anyone could photograph. He simply dismantled her slowly and precisely, the way someone might disassemble a clock, piece by piece, until nothing ticked anymore. And then he walked away with his reputation spotless. Elara had not planned to be at the Whitmore charity ball. Her board had pushed her. The nonprofit had been nominated for a community impact grant, and Marcus, her program director, had sat across from her in their little office with his hands folded and told her she had to go. "You built this thing," he said. "You should be in the room when it gets recognized." She had stared at the whiteboard, counted the names, said yes. She had bought a black dress she found on sale and spent 3 months quietly setting aside money for it. She had stood in her bathroom mirror for 20 minutes before leaving, pressing her lips together, breathing slowly. She told herself she was ready. She was not ready. She did not know Damien would be there. She did not know that Nico Raines would be there either. She did not know much about Nico at all, only what surfaces offered. On the surface, he was a real estate investor, quiet and self-contained, the kind of man who stood in the corner of every room and somehow made the room feel like it belonged to him. Some people called him shrewd. Some called him connected. The people who knew more than that did not say much at all. They just chose their words carefully whenever his name came up. The Whitmore Ballroom was the kind of place that made you feel underdressed even when you were not. Crystal chandeliers threw soft gold light across the room. Waitstaff moved like water between guests in tailored suits and dresses that cost more than Elara's monthly rent. The air smelled like expensive perfume and catered salmon. Everything in that room was deliberate. The flowers were deliberate. The music was deliberate. Even the laughter was deliberate. Elara stood near the entrance for a moment, straightening the strap of her dress, and let herself take one quiet breath. She did not belong here the way these people belonged here. She had never belonged here. But she had learned that belonging was sometimes just a decision you made with your posture. So she pulled her shoulders back and walked in. She found her table. She exchanged small talk with 2 other nonprofit representatives who were kind and warm and made the first 20 minutes bearable. She sipped water because the champagne felt like a risk on a night when she needed to be clear. She told herself it was fine. She almost believed it. She did not see him until she heard him. That voice, that perfectly modulated, warmly projected, carefully practiced voice. She heard it cut through the ambient noise of the room like a scalpel, and every nerve in her body went cold before her brain had even caught up. Alara. What a surprise. She turned slowly, because turning quickly would have looked like panic, and she had promised herself a long time ago that she would never let Damien Holt see her panic again. He looked exactly the same. That was the worst part. He stood there in a perfectly fitted charcoal suit with a pocket square she recognized as Italian silk, his dark hair touched with a little gray that made him look distinguished rather than old. And he was smiling. Warm, open, the smile that had fooled everyone. The smile that had once fooled her. He had not come alone. 3 people flanked him loosely, all of them mid-conversation, all of them now looking at Alara with the polite, curious attention of people who did not know the history, but were about to be handed a version of it. I heard about your little charity, he said, and the way he said little was so smooth, so carefully offhand, that someone who did not know him might have thought it was affection. Very moving story you have built around it. Alara felt her stomach drop straight through the floor. She kept her face still. He took one step closer, lowering his voice just enough to seem intimate while staying loud enough for the people immediately around them to hear every word. I have to say, I find it remarkable, the way you have used what happened between us to construct this whole narrative. The abuse, the trauma, really, Alara, all of it fabricated and packaged so neatly. He tilted his head, and his expression shifted into something that looked almost like concern. You do know people ask questions, right? People who matter in this city. The air in that corner of the room changed. She could feel it. The small conversations nearby had gone quiet. A woman in a green gown had stopped reaching for a champagne glass. A man in a gray suit had turned his head by just a few degrees, enough to hear without looking like he was listening. Damien was not just talking to her. He never had been. He was performing. He was standing in a room full of donors, board members, and city officials, and he was systematically poisoning the water. He was turning her story into a lie in real time, in front of the people whose belief in her work was the only thing keeping hope forward alive. She built an entire nonprofit on a fabricated abuse story, he said to the room now, not even pretending anymore, his voice carrying that easy, regretful tone of a man reluctantly setting the record straight. I think that says everything, doesn't it? The silence that followed was the loudest thing Alara had ever heard. She felt it press against her chest. She felt the old familiar pull, the one she knew from years of closed-room arguments and carefully worded humiliations. The pull that said, disappear, fold, make yourself small enough that this stops. She felt her hands want to shake, and she pressed them flat against her sides. She felt her throat tighten, and she breathed through it slowly, the way her therapist had taught her, the way she had practiced in the quiet of her apartment on the hard nights. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She did not scramble to explain herself to a room full of people who did not know her, because she understood with total clarity in that moment that explaining herself to this man, in this room, on his terms, was exactly what he wanted. He wanted her flustered. He wanted her voice to crack. He wanted her to look unstable in front of every person in the city whose opinion could help or hurt her. He had done this before in smaller rooms, and it had worked. Not tonight. She looked at him, not with fury, not with tears. She looked at him the way you look at something you have already made peace with, something that no longer has the power to define you. And then she said, quietly and clearly enough for every person nearby to hear, I know exactly what I survived, Damien. So do the women sitting in my office every week. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked away. Not fast, not slow. She walked the way a woman walks when she has decided that the conversation is over, when she has decided that her dignity is not up for negotiation, not tonight and not ever again. Her heels were steady on the marble floor. Her chin was level. Her eyes were dry. Behind her, she heard the murmur of the room shift. She could not name exactly what changed, but something had. The air moved differently. She did not look back to see his expression because she did not need to. She crossed the ballroom floor and found a quiet alcove near the far wall and stood there for a moment, pressing one hand flat against the cool plaster, breathing in through her nose and out through her mouth. Her whole body was shaking on the inside in a way that no one outside could see. She stood there until it passed. Then she smoothed the front of her dress and lifted her chin and went to find the event coordinator to thank them for the nomination, because that was why she had come. That was the only reason she had come. She did not notice the man at the edge of the room who had been standing very still throughout all of it. She did not notice the way he had watched Damien's performance with an expression that gave away nothing at all. She did not notice when he quietly set down his glass on a nearby tray and slipped out of the room without saying a word to anyone. She only noticed the envelope an hour later. She was at the cloakroom, the event winding down, collecting her coat from the attendant. The envelope was tucked into the inner breast pocket of her coat, where it had not been when she arrived. Cream-colored, thick paper, no name on the front. She stood under the dim cloakroom light and opened it carefully. Inside was a single card. 2 words, handwritten in clean dark ink. "It is handled." Ilara stared at it for a long moment. The handwriting was steady, unhurried, the kind of writing that belonged to someone who never needed to rush, because things had a way of resolving in their favor regardless. She did not know what it meant. She did not know who had put it there. She slid the card back into the envelope and the envelope into her small clutch and walked out into the cold night air alone, her breath rising in small white clouds, the city spread out and indifferent around her. But something told her, deep and quiet and certain, that she was about to find out. She did not sleep that night. She lay on top of her covers in the dark with her coat still draped over the chair by the door and the envelope on her nightstand, and she stared at the ceiling until the light outside her window went from black to gray to the pale, reluctant blue of early morning. The little plant on the windowsill caught the first thin strip of sunrise, and she watched it without really seeing it, her mind turning over those 2 words the way you turn over a stone you're not sure you want to look under. "It is handled." She had read it so many times the words had stopped looking like words. She had held the card up to the light. She had run her thumb across the ink. The handwriting was clean and even, no hesitation in the strokes, no urgency. Whoever had written, it was someone who did not need to hurry. Someone who had decided something and simply informed the world of it afterward. That was what kept her awake. Not gratitude, not relief. Something closer to the feeling you get when you realize someone has been standing behind you without your knowing, watching, deciding things on your behalf while you were busy just trying to stay upright. She got up at 6, made coffee she barely tasted, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and the card propped against her mug like it had something left to say. She started with what she knew: the Whitmore Ball, the guest list, which was not public, but which had been partially covered by 2 society page write-ups she found in under 4 minutes. She scrolled through names, donors, board members, city council representatives. And there, in a brief caption beneath a photograph of men in dark suits standing near the bar, a name she had only ever heard in passing: Nico Rains. She looked at the photograph for a long time. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking slightly to the left, expression unreadable, a glass held loosely in one hand. He was not smiling, but he did not look unfriendly either. He just looked like a man who was paying attention to something no one else had noticed yet. She searched his name. Real estate development, mostly. A firm called Rains Capital with a website that was clean and sparse and told you almost nothing. A few mentions in business columns. A profile piece from 4 years ago that described him as quietly influential in the city's commercial corridor and left it at that. There were no scandals attached to his name. No lawsuits. No photographs of him at charity events grinning for cameras. He existed in the public record the way a shadow exists, present and real, but never fully resolved into something you could hold. She pushed the laptop away and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. Then her phone lit up with a text from Marcus. He had sent a link. A news article published that morning from a regional financial outlet she occasionally skimmed. The headline was measured and dry the way financial headlines always are, but what it described was not dry at all. 3 of Damien Holt's primary commercial investors had quietly withdrawn from a joint development project. The SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry into the financial disclosures of 2 of his holding companies. A 4th investor, one of the largest, had released a brief statement saying only that they were reassessing their portfolio commitments. Marcus had typed beneath the link, "Is this related to last night?" Alara sat very still. She read the article twice. Then she set her phone face down on the table and looked at the card again. The ink, the steadiness of it, the absolute absence of drama in those 2 words, as if what had been done was not extraordinary at all, as if it was simply the logical outcome of a decision made by someone who had the means and the will and nothing further to explain. She understood then. Not all of it, but enough. She found a phone number through a contact at the city planning office who owed her a favor from 2 years back. A woman named Diane who had once referred 3 clients to Hope Forward and who, when Alara called and asked carefully and without explaining too much, gave her what she needed without asking too many questions in return. It took her the rest of the morning and part of the afternoon to work up the particular kind of nerve required. Not courage exactly. More like the decision that the alternative, doing nothing, sitting with this, letting someone else hold the reins of something that happened in her life, was worse than whatever discomfort was waiting on the other side of this conversation. She drove to the address Diane had given her, a building in the commercial district, steel and dark glass, the kind of building that did not have a sign out front because the people who needed to find it already knew where it was. She told the woman at the front desk she was there to see Nico Rains. The woman looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of someone trained to be politely impossible and then picked up the phone and said something quietly into it. There was a pause. Then, "He will see you." She was shown to an elevator, then to a floor near the top, then to an office with wide windows that looked out over the whole city, the building spread below like a map of every decision ever made in this place. The room itself was spare. A desk, 2 chairs, a low shelf with a few books and no decorations. No awards on the wall. No magazine covers. Just a room where work got done by someone who did not need the walls to tell him who he was. Nico Rains was standing when she walked in, his back half turned, looking out at the city. He turned when he heard her, and he looked exactly like the man in the photograph, except that photographs do not capture the particular quality of stillness some people carry in their bodies, the kind that does not come from calm so much as from total, unbroken control. He said, "Ms. Voss." Not a question, not a greeting exactly, just her name, placed in the air between them like he had been expecting this. She walked to the center of the room and stood there and did not sit down, because sitting felt like accepting hospitality she had not come here for. She looked at him directly and said, "You put that note in my coat." He did not deny it. He simply looked at her with those steady, unreadable eyes and said, "Yes." And the SEC inquiry, the investors pulling out of his projects, a pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm everything. "Things have a way of coming to light," he said. She felt the heat rise in her chest, and she did not push it down. "I did not ask you to do that." Something shifted in his expression then, just slightly, like a door that opens half an inch. "No," he said. "You did not." "I was handling it," she said, and her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not quite anger and not quite grief, something that lived in the space between the two. "I've been handling it for 2 years. I built something. I made something real from the wreckage of what he did to me. And what you did last night, without asking me, without once considering whether I wanted it, you made me into someone who needed rescuing. Do you understand that? You took a decision that was mine to make, and you made it for me. And that is exactly what he used to do." The room was very quiet. Nico Rains looked at her for a long moment. She watched something move across his face, slow and unannounced. Not defensiveness. Not the polished, non-responsive man who had never been challenged this way. Something more honest than that. Something that looked, for just a moment, like a man encountering a mirror he did not know was in the room. He said quietly, "You are right." She had not expected that. She had come prepared for deflection, for charm, for the smooth recalibration of a powerful man who had never needed to justify himself to anyone. She had not come prepared for two words that landed with the same weight as his handwriting on that card. Simple and without performance. "I am not asking for your protection," she said, her voice lower now, but no less certain. "I am not a problem to be solved or a debt someone owes you or a situation you manage from the edge of a room." "I know," he said. "Do you?" He held her gaze. "I'm beginning to." She stood there a moment longer. The city sprawled behind him through the glass, indifferent and enormous. She thought about the ballroom. She thought about the way the silence had pressed against her chest and how she had breathed through it. She thought about the plan on her windowsill and the whiteboard in her office and every name written on it. She had not needed him to handle anything, but she recognized, standing in that spare and quiet room, that whatever he had not done it for leverage. She could not entirely explain how she knew that. She just did, the way you know certain things about people when they're standing in front of you without their armor on. She picked up her bag from her shoulder and said, "Do not do anything else on my behalf without asking me first." He said, "Understood." She turned and walked to the door. She was almost through it when she heard him say her name. Not Ms. Voss this time, just Alara. Quiet, like it was something he was careful with. She paused in the doorway, but did not turn all the way around. He said, "What you did last night, standing there the way you did. I have been in rooms my whole life with people who fold under pressure. I have never seen anyone hold themselves the way you did." She did not answer him, but she stood in the doorway for exactly one breath longer than she needed to, and then she left. She drove back to the Hope Ford office, parked in the small lot behind the building, sat in her car for a minute with both hands on the wheel and the engine off. Then she got out and went inside. The office smelled like coffee and the faint vanilla of the candle someone always kept burning on the reception desk. The mismatched chairs were all occupied. Two women were sitting with case coordinators, their heads bent over paperwork, their voices low. Marcus looked up from his desk when she walked in and gave her a long look, and she gave him a small nod, and he seemed to understand, because Marcus always seemed to understand, and he went back to his work. She went to her office at the back. The window faced east, but the afternoon light came in sideways and warm, and it caught the whiteboard on the wall and made the names written there glow slightly. She stood at the window and looked out at the ordinary street below. A food cart, a man walking a dog, a teenager on a bicycle weaving through slow traffic. She was not the woman who had stood frozen in a glittering room while her past tried to swallow her whole. She was not the woman who had pressed her hand against a ballroom wall and shaken where no one could see. She was still Alara Voss. She had always been Alara Voss. But something had clarified in the past 24 hours the way water clarifies when you stop stirring it and let it settle. She knew what she had survived. She knew what she had built. And she knew, with a steadiness that had nothing to do with anyone else in the world, that she would choose very carefully who she let stand beside her from here on out. That was the part no one could take from her. Not Damien. Not a room full of silent, watching strangers. Not even a man in a quiet office at the top of a steel and glass building who had, for one unasked for moment, tried to carry something that was hers to carry. As for Damien Holt, the city did not erupt over his fall. It never does with men like him. It was quiet, a slow withdrawal of trust and money and access, the way the tide goes out. The SEC inquiry deepened. The investors did not return. His name disappeared from benefit programs and gala programs and the charity circuit that had once treated him like royalty. He did not go to prison. Men like him rarely do. But he lost the thing he had valued most, the image, the room full of people who believed in the version of himself he had so carefully constructed. And in the end, for a man like Damien Holt, that was everything. Nico Raines did not reach out again. Not that week. But she thought about what he had said in that quiet room, the way he had stood there and received her anger without flinching and then told her she was right. She had known a lot of powerful people. She had never known one who could do that. And Alara stood at her window in the late afternoon light and breathed in the smell of coffee and vanilla and the particular quiet of a room full of people doing work that mattered. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not rescued, not protected, Not handled, just whole.